The Arizona sun hung low over the Desert Rose clubhouse, casting long shadows across the dusty parking lot, where dozens of motorcycles sat in silent formation. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and grief, a combination that had become all too familiar over the years, but never easier to bear. Jake Reaper Morrison stood at the head of the worn wooden table, his calloused hands pressed flat against its surface. At 52, his face was a roadmap of hard miles and harder decisions, deep lines etched around his eyes, a scar running along his left jaw, and a salt-and-pepper beard that had seen too many winters on the open road. The kuta, the sacred leather vest bearing the club's colors, hung heavy on his shoulders, weighted not just by patches and pins, but by the responsibility of leading 73 men who'd follow him into hell itself. Tommy's service is set for Saturday. Jake's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. Pine Ridge, Colorado, his hometown. His family requested it there, and we're gonna honor that. The room fell silent. Tommy Wrench Sullivan had been more than just a member. He'd been the heart of their chapter. A Marine Corps veteran who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, Tommy had come home with demons he couldn't outrun and found brotherhood in the club. For 15 years, he'd been their road captain, their mechanic, their friend. Last Tuesday, a drunk driver had crossed the center line on Highway 60, and Tommy never saw it coming. Marcus "Smoke" Davis, a barrel-chested black man in his 40s with graying temples and hands that could crush walnuts, spoke up from the corner. Pine Ridge is a small town, Reaper. 300 people, maybe. They're not going to be happy about a full chapter riding through their streets. I don't give a damn about their happiness, growled Ray Diesel Patterson, slamming his fist on the table. At 38, Diesel was the youngest of Jake's senior members, hot-headed, loyal to a fault, and still carrying the anger of a man who'd lost his father to prejudice and assumptions. Tommy deserves a proper send-off. We ride together or we don't ride at all. Jake raised his hand, silencing the rising voices. We ride, all of us, but we do it right. His steel-gray eyes swept the room. Tommy wore the uniform before he wore these colors. He served his country with honor. We're going to show that same respect. To him, to his family, and to anyone who stands in our way. Carlos "Ghost" Mendoza leaned back in his chair, his weathered brown face thoughtful. At 60, Ghost was the club's unofficial historian, a man who'd seen the club evolve from wild rebels to something more complex, men seeking belonging in a world that had cast them aside. I called ahead, he said quietly. Talked to the funeral home. Word is the sheriff's already spooked. They've never had more than a handful of bikes in town at once. We're talking 70-plus riders. Let me guess, Marcus said, rubbing his temples. They think we're coming to tear up their town. Something like that. Ghost pulled out a folded newspaper clipping from his wallet. Town had a bad incident 15 years back. Different MC, different circumstances. Some idiots got drunk, trashed a bar, scared the locals. Sheriff back then was Tommy's uncle, Robert Sullivan. He handled it, but the town never forgot. Jake's expression softened for just a moment. Tommy ever talk about that? Once, Ghost replied. Said it broke his uncle's heart. Robert was a good man, fair. He retired 8 years ago. New sheriff's a guy named Bill Crawford. Don't know much about him, but he's got a reputation for playing it by the book. The clubhouse door creaked open, and a young woman stepped inside. Sarah Sullivan, Tommy's younger sister. At 32, she had her brother's sharp green eyes and determined jaw. She'd driven 8 hours from Pine Ridge to personally invite the club to the funeral, despite her mother's protests. Sarah, Jake moved around the table, his rough demeanor softening. You didn't have to come all this way. Yes, I did. Her voice was steady, but red-rimmed eyes betrayed sleepless nights of crying. Tommy loved you all. You were his family when he couldn't find his way back to us. Mom doesn't understand that, but I do. She looked around the room at the assembled faces, men covered in tattoos, scarred by life, but standing in respectful silence. I need you to know something. Sheriff Crawford called me yesterday. He's planning to block the bridge into town. He says it's for public safety, but really he's scared. The town council is scared. Diesel shot to his feet. The hell he is. We have every right. Sit down, Diesel, Jake commanded, his voice like gravel. The younger man obeyed, jaw clenched tight. Sarah continued, I told Crawford that you're coming to honor a veteran, a brother, a son of Pine Ridge. He didn't care. He sees the colors, and that's all that matters to him. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a photograph. Tommy in his dress blues, young and proud, standing next to an older man in a sheriff's uniform. This was taken at Tommy's going-away party before his first deployment. That's Uncle Robert. He understood Tommy. Crawford doesn't. Jake took the photograph, studying it carefully. "What do you want us to do, Sarah?" "Come," she said firmly. "Come and remind this town who my brother really was. Not the stereotype they're afraid of, but the man who fixed Mrs. Henderson's tractor for free, who taught kids at the youth center how to change oil, who carried groceries for elderly neighbors." Her voice cracked. "He deserves better than fear and prejudice at his own funeral." The room remained silent for a long moment. Then Marcus stood, followed by Ghost, then Diesel, until every man in the clubhouse was on his feet. A wordless promise. Jake handed the photograph back to Sarah. "We'll be there. Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Full chapter. And Sarah," he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, "we'll make your brother proud." As Sarah left, Jake turned back to his men. The weight of leadership had never felt heavier. Outside, the desert wind kicked up dust devils in the parking lot, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, a lonely sound that echoed the grief they all carried. "Gentlemen," Jake said, his voice low and measured, "pack light, ride smart, and remember, we're not going to war. We're going to honor one of our own. Whatever happens on that bridge, we handle it with the same dignity Tommy would have shown. Are we clear?" A chorus of "Yes, Reaper" filled the room. Marcus approached Jake after the others began to disperse. "You really think we can ride through a police blockade without things going sideways?" Jake stared out the window at the setting sun, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. "I don't know, brother. But I know this. Tommy died on a road doing what he loved. If we let fear stop us from honoring that, we're not the men we claim to be. And if Crawford doesn't back down?" Jake's eyes hardened. "Then we show him what real honor looks like." The two men stood in silence as darkness crept across the Arizona landscape, both knowing that in 3 days everything would change. The question wasn't whether they would ride. It was whether the bridge that separated them from Pine Ridge would become a battlefield or a bridge to something greater. Outside, the motorcycles waited like steel horses, ready to carry their riders toward an uncertain confrontation, one that would test not just their courage, but the very meaning of respect, brotherhood, and the thin line between law and loyalty. Friday morning broke cold and clear across the Arizona desert. By 6 a.m., the Desert Rose parking lot was alive with the rumble of engines and the sharp smell of gasoline and coffee. 73 motorcycles stood in formation, Harleys mostly, their chrome catching the early light like mirrors reflecting years of loyalty and miles traveled. Jake Morrison stood beside his 1995 Heritage Softail, running through his pre-ride checklist with the methodical precision of a man who'd learned the hard way that preparation was the difference between making it home and becoming a cautionary tale. His bike was pristine despite its age, black with deep red flames, Tommy's handiwork from 5 years back. Every time Jake looked at those flames, he saw his friend's crooked grin, heard his voice. "Reaper, you're too serious. Let's give this beast some fire." "Roll call." Marcus's voice boomed across the lot. One by one, riders called out their names, a ritual that confirmed everyone was accounted for, ready, committed to the journey ahead. Carlos Ghost Mendoza wheeled up beside Jake, his Road King gleaming silver in the morning sun. "Weather report says clear skies until we hit Colorado. Could see some rain in the mountains tomorrow morning. We'll deal with it." Jake pulled on his gloves, black leather, worn soft by countless miles. "How's the route looking?" "Highway 89 north to Flagstaff, then 40 east through New Mexico into Colorado. About 11 hours if we keep a steady pace. I've mapped out fuel stops and rest points." Ghost handed Jake a folded paper with the route marked in red ink. "Figured we'd overnight in Durango. Hit Pine Ridge first thing Saturday morning." Jake studied the map, noting the final stretch, a 2-lane highway that wound through mountain passes before reaching Pine Ridge. The town sat in a valley, accessible by a single bridge over the Pine River, a geographic bottleneck that made Crawford's planned blockade tactically smart, if morally questionable. "Riders up!" Jake's command cut through the morning air. Engines roared to life in a symphony of American steel and raw power. The sound was more than noise. It was identity, purpose, defiance against a world that had tried to box them in and label them as threats. Sarah Sullivan stood by her car, having stayed overnight in a local motel. She raised her hand in farewell, tears streaming down her face. Jake nodded to her, a promise without words. "We'll bring your brother home with honor." The procession rolled out at 6:47 a.m., Jake in the lead position, Marcus and Ghost flanking him. Behind them, the chapter stretched in a disciplined two-column formation, a river of leather and chrome flowing north through the awakening desert. Hour 3. Somewhere on Highway 89. The landscape had shifted from flat desert to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine. The morning chill had burned off, replaced by the pleasant warmth of a high desert autumn day. Jake's mind wandered as the miles passed beneath his wheels, a meditation that came naturally after decades on the road. He thought about the first time he'd met Tommy Sullivan, 13 years ago at a VA hospital in Phoenix. Jake had been there visiting another club member, and Tommy had been sitting alone in the psychiatric ward's common room, staring at a television that wasn't even on. The haunted look in Tommy's eyes had been familiar. Jake had seen it in mirrors for years after his own service in Desert Storm. "You look like you could use a ride," Jake had said. No introduction, no pleasantries. Tommy had looked up, something flickering in those dead eyes. "I don't ride anymore." "Then you need to start again. Road's the only therapist that never judges." That conversation had led to a friendship built on shared silence and understanding. Tommy never talked much about Afghanistan. Didn't need to. The nightmares, the startle reflex, the way crowds made him sweat, Jake understood all of it without explanation. A hand signal from Marcus pulled Jake from his memories. Fuel stop ahead. A truck stop outside Flagstaff. The procession peeled off the highway in perfect formation, drawing stares from truckers and families that ranged from curious to fearful. Inside the truck stop, Jake watched his men spread out. Some to the bathroom, others to the coffee counter, a few to the convenience store for snacks. They moved with awareness, never turning their backs to the room, always positioned to see exits. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival instinct earned through experiences with people who saw the colors and assumed the worst. A young state trooper, maybe 25, sat at the counter nursing coffee. His hand drifted toward his radio as the club members entered. Marcus noticed and deliberately chose the stool beside him. "Morning, officer," Marcus said easily, ordering coffee black. "Hell of a day for a ride." The trooper relaxed slightly, taking in Marcus's grey-streaked beard and calm demeanor. "That's a lot of bikes. Where you all headed?" "Funeral," Marcus replied simply. "Brother of ours died." "We're riding to pay respects." "Sorry for your loss." The trooper meant it. Jake could hear it in his voice. "You're heading to Pine Ridge, aren't you?" "Sheriff up there's been on the wire all morning. He's pretty worked up." "We're not looking for trouble," Jake interjected, leaning against the counter. "Just want to honor a fallen Marine and get back on the road." The trooper studied Jake's face, the crow's feet around his eyes, the military bearing despite the leather and patches, the weariness of a man who'd carried weight for too long. "You serve?" "Army, Ranger Battalion. Long time ago." Jake didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. "My dad was Army, 101st Airborne." The trooper extended his hand. "Officer David Chen. Look, I don't know what Crawford's planning, but for what it's worth, I think you guys are getting a raw deal. Town's judge, jury, and executioner before you've even shown up." Jake shook his hand firmly. "Appreciate that, officer. We'll conduct ourselves with respect, that's all we can control." Chen nodded, stood and dropped money on the counter for his coffee. "Safe ride, gentlemen, and thank you for your service." "Both kinds." As the trooper left, Diesel approached, watching through the window. "That could have gone sideways fast." "Respect goes both ways," Marcus said, sipping his coffee. "Kids saw us as people, not a stereotype. Wish more folks could do that." Ghost joined them, carrying a local newspaper. "You need to see this." He spread it on the counter. Pine Ridge Gazette, that morning's edition. The headline read, "Motorcycle Gang Threatens Town Peace, Sheriff Vows Protection." Jake read the article, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. It painted the club as an invading force, quoted anonymous townspeople expressing fear, and positioned Crawford as a heroic defender. Tommy's death was mentioned in a single sentence, with no acknowledgement of his military service or connection to the town. "They're framing this before we even arrive," Diesel growled. "Making us the villains. Then we prove them wrong," Jake said firmly, folding the newspaper. "We don't give them ammunition. We ride clean, act with honor, and show them who we really are." Carlos pulled out his phone, showing Jake a text from Sarah. "Mom just called. She's terrified. Half the town thinks you're coming to riot. Crawford's got every off-duty officer on standby. Jake, I'm scared this is going to explode. Jake typed back, "Trust us, we've got this. Tell your mom we're coming in peace and we'll prove it." He pocketed his phone and addressed the men gathering around. "Listen up. This just got more complicated. Town's already convicted us. Crawford's ready for war. So here's how we play this. When we reach that bridge tomorrow, we stop. No revving engines, no showboating, no giving them a reason to fulfill their worst assumptions. We show them discipline, respect, and honor. We show them, Tommy." The men nodded, understanding the stakes. Hour 8. New Mexico border. The landscape had transformed into high desert mesas and vast stretches of emptiness. The temperature had dropped, and the riders pulled on warmer layers during a brief stop. Jake felt the fatigue setting in, not just from the ride, but from the emotional weight of the journey. Ghost rode up beside him as they prepared to resume. "You remember that run we did to Sturgis?" 09. Tommy had just patched in. Kid was so nervous he kept stalling his bike. Jake smiled despite himself. Took him 3 tries to get out of the parking lot. Thought Marcus was gonna have an aneurysm. But once we hit the open road, Ghost's voice trailed off. Both men remembering Tommy finding his rhythm, his confidence, his joy in the pure freedom of the ride. "He was a hell of a rider," Jake said quietly. "Never reckless, always aware. That drunk driver. Tommy never had a chance. Life's not fair, brother. But we can make his death mean something. Show that town the man they forgot." As they mounted up for the final push to Durango, Jake looked back at his chapter. Men of every background, every race, every story of hardship and redemption. Society saw outlaws. He saw brothers. The sun was setting as they crossed into Colorado, painting the mountains ahead in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay Pine Ridge, a bridge and a confrontation that would define them all. Jake twisted the throttle, feeling the road beneath him, the wind against his face, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight they rode for Tommy, and that was enough. Saturday morning arrived with a bitter cold that cut through leather and denim alike. At 7 a.m., the parking lot of the Durango Motel resembled a military staging area. Riders checking tire pressure, oil levels and gear, with the focused intensity of men preparing for something more than just a ride. Jake hadn't slept. He'd spent the night sitting on the motel room's small balcony, watching stars fade into dawn, thinking about every possible scenario that could unfold at that bridge. Best case, they rode through peacefully. Worst case, a standoff that ended with arrests, violence, or worse, confirming every negative assumption the town already held. Marcus found him there at 6:30, 2 cups of gas station coffee in hand. "You've been out here all night. Couldn't shut my brain off." Jake accepted the coffee gratefully. "Keep running through the possibilities. We've got 73 men who trust me to make the right call. If this goes bad..." "It won't," Marcus interrupted firmly. "Because you don't make bad calls. 20 years I've ridden with you, and you've never led us into something we couldn't handle. Today's no different. Today's completely different, and you know it." Jake sipped the bitter coffee. "We're not dealing with rival clubs or territory disputes. We're dealing with civilian fear, legal authority, and public perception. One wrong move and we cement every stereotype Crawford's been feeding them. Then we don't make a wrong move." Marcus leaned against the railing, his breath visible in the cold air. "Look, I get it. The weight's on you. But you're not alone in this. We all know what's at stake. We all chose to be here." Jake nodded, but the knot in his stomach remained. At 7:45, he gathered the chapter in the motel parking lot. The morning light cast long shadows across faces that ranged from determined to anxious. "Before we roll," Jake began, his voice carrying across the silent group, "I need every one of you to understand what we're about to do. We're riding into a town that's been conditioned to fear us. We're approaching a police blockade that's been set up specifically to stop us. This is not about ego. This is not about proving we're tough. This is about showing respect to Tommy, to his family, and to the concept of honor itself." He paused, making eye contact with each rider. "When we reach that bridge, we stop. Not aggressively, not dramatically. We simply stop. Engines off. No shouting, no posturing, no bullshit. I'll handle Crawford. If he refuses to let us pass, we don't force the issue. We don't give him the satisfaction of confirming his fears. We find another way, or we accept his decision with dignity. Are we clear?" "Clear, Reaper," came the unified response. Diesel stepped forward, his jaw tight. "And if Crawford gets disrespectful?" If he treats us like criminals when we're just trying to honor a brother? Jake held his gaze. Then we take it. We swallow our pride and we take it. Because Tommy's memory is worth more than our egos. His family is watching. The town is watching. The world is watching. We be better than their assumptions. The ride from Durango to Pine Ridge took 90 minutes through winding mountain roads that carved through pine forests and granite cliffs. The beauty of the landscape stood in sharp contrast to the tension coiling in every rider's gut. As they climbed higher, frost clung to tree branches, and their breath fogged in the cold morning air. Jake felt every mile like a countdown, every curve bringing them closer to the moment of truth. At 9:47 a.m. they crested a hill, and Pine Ridge Valley spread before them, a picturesque mountain town of Victorian-era buildings, a white church steeple, and neat streets that looked like something from a postcard. And there, at the valley's entrance, spanning the Pine River, the bridge. Even from a distance, Jake could see the blockade. 6 patrol cars formed a barricade across the bridge, light bars flashing red and blue against the morning sun. Behind them stood at least a dozen officers in full tactical gear, body armor, rifles visible, a show of force designed to intimidate. "Jesus," Ghost muttered over the radio. "They brought the whole damn department." "And then some," Marcus added. "Those aren't all local cops. See the different uniforms, county sheriffs, maybe state troopers." Crawford called in reinforcements. Jake's mind raced through calculations. They were outnumbered in terms of legal authority, but vastly outnumbered the police in sheer numbers. Any escalation would be catastrophic, not just for them, but for Tommy's family, for the funeral, for every small-town perception of motorcycle clubs across the country. "Formation tighten," Jake commanded over radio. "We approach slow and controlled. When I signal stop, you stop immediately." No exceptions. The procession descended into the valley, the rumble of 73 engines echoing off canyon walls, a sound that was probably terrifying to the townspeople watching from windows and doorways. Jake could see faces pressed against glass, people standing on porches, some with phones raised to record the moment. They reached the base of the bridge at 9:54 a.m. Jake raised his left fist, the signal to stop. In perfect synchronization, every rider halted, boots hitting pavement in a ripple effect that traveled the length of the column. For a long moment, only the idle of engines filled the air, a low, rhythmic rumble that seemed to pulse with collective heartbeats. The police stood rigid behind their vehicles, hands near weapons, faces hidden behind sunglasses, and professional masks of neutrality that barely concealed fear and aggression. Sheriff Bill Crawford stood in the center, a tall man in his mid-50s with iron-gray hair and a linebacker's build. His jaw was set, shoulders squared, every inch of his body language screaming, "You shall not pass." Jake took a deep breath, reached down, and turned off his ignition. The silence that followed was profound, 73 engines cutting out in a wave, leaving only the sound of wind through pine trees and the distant rush of the river below. Marcus and Ghost followed suit immediately, then Diesel, then every rider down the line. Within 30 seconds, the only sound was nature itself and the crackling static of police radios. Jake swung his leg over the bike, planted his boots firmly on the asphalt, and reached up to remove his helmet. His grey hair was matted with sweat despite the cold, his face weathered and serious. He handed the helmet to Marcus without looking, his eyes locked on Crawford. "What are you doing?" Ghost whispered urgently. "Showing them we're human," Jake replied quietly. He began walking toward the police line, hands visible at his sides, pace measured and non-threatening. "Reaper, wait." Marcus started to dismount. "Stay," Jake commanded softly. "I need you all to stay right where you are, no matter what happens next." Each step toward that police line felt like walking through water, the weight of 73 pairs of eyes on his back, the weight of his entire chapter's reputation, the weight of Tommy's memory, all pressing down on his shoulders. Crawford's hand moved to his holster as Jake approached, stopping about 15 feet from the barricade. The other officers tensed, rifles shifting slightly, ready for escalation. "That's far enough," Crawford called out, his voice hard as the mountain stone around them. "You and your gang need to turn around and leave. This town doesn't want you here." Jake stood still, letting the words hang in the cold air. He studied Crawford's face, saw not just authority, but fear masking as aggression, duty masking as prejudice, and underneath it all, the same weight of responsibility Jake himself carried. "Sheriff Crawford," Jake began, his voice calm and respectful, projecting enough to be heard by both police and riders. "My name is Jake Morrison. I'm the president of this club. We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to attend the funeral of Thomas Sullivan, a Marine Corps veteran, a son of this town, and a brother to every man standing behind me." "I know who you are," Crawford snapped. "I know what you represent. Drugs, violence, criminal enterprise hidden behind a facade of brotherhood. I've read the reports, Morrison. I know your history." Jake didn't rise to the bait. "Then you know that charges have never stuck, because we're not the organization you think we are. We're veterans, fathers, workers. We're men who found family when society turned its back on us." He paused, letting that sink in. "Tommy Sullivan was one of us because his country gave him PTSD, and his hometown didn't know how to help him heal. We did. That's convenient justification for—" "For what?" Jake interrupted, voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "For giving a broken man purpose, for sitting with him through nightmares, for teaching him that his worth wasn't measured by his wounds." His eyes never left Crawford's. "What exactly do you think we did for Tommy Sullivan?" Crawford faltered for just a moment. Jake saw it in the slight tension in his jaw, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. 3 years ago," Jake continued, "Tommy called me at 2 a.m. He was standing on the Hoover Dam Bridge with a gun to his head. You know what I did, Sheriff? I talked him down. I drove 4 hours to get to him. I sat with him until sunrise, and then I brought him back to our clubhouse where 15 men took turns making sure he was never alone until he could trust himself again." Jake's voice roughened with emotion. "So don't tell me we're a criminal enterprise. We saved that man's life, and now you're trying to deny us the right to honor his death." The officers behind Crawford shifted uncomfortably. One younger deputy, couldn't be more than 23, lowered his rifle slightly, his face troubled. Crawford's expression hardened, but Jake saw the crack in the armor, the moment of doubt, the recognition that maybe, just maybe, he'd misjudged the situation. "Even if what you say is true," Crawford said, voice less certain, "I have a responsibility to this town. You bring 70-plus bikers through these streets, and people are terrified. Businesses are closed. Schools are on lockdown. You want me to just wave you through and hope for the best?" Jake took a single step closer, hands still visible and non-threatening. "No, Sheriff. I want you to hold us accountable to the same standards you'd hold anyone else. If one of my men steps out of line, arrests him. If anyone causes property damage, we'll pay for it. If anyone shows disrespect to your town, I'll personally remove him from the funeral." He paused. "But don't punish 73 men for crimes they haven't committed. Don't deny Tommy Sullivan the honor he deserves, because you're afraid of what we might do." "How do I know you're not just telling me what I want to hear?" Jake reached slowly into his vest, causing every officer to tense. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it up. "This is a letter from Sarah Sullivan, Tommy's sister. She invited us. She wants us here. You're not protecting his family by keeping us out. You're dishonoring his memory." He walked forward another 3 steps, close enough to hand the letter to Crawford, who took it reluctantly and read it quickly. Jake watched his face as he processed Sarah's words, saw the conflict play across his features. "There's something else you should know," Jake said quietly, for Crawford's ears alone now. "Tommy talked about this town all the time. Talked about his Uncle Robert, the sheriff before you. Robert understood that the badge doesn't make you better than anyone else. It makes you responsible for everyone else. Tommy admired that. Said his uncle taught him that respect isn't demanded. It's earned through actions." Crawford's head snapped up. "You knew Robert Sullivan. Never met him. But Tommy carried his lessons, carried his integrity." Jake's voice was soft now, almost gentle. "You want to be the sheriff who turned away a Marine's brothers from his funeral? Or do you want to be the sheriff who had the courage to judge men by their actions instead of their appearance?" The silence that followed was profound. Jake could hear the river flowing beneath the bridge, could feel the eyes of everyone present boring into this moment. Behind him, his chapter waited in disciplined silence, a testament to their trust in him, their commitment to honor. Crawford looked past Jake to the assembled riders, saw men of every race and age standing in respectful stillness, saw the flags mounted on some bikes, American flags, POW MIA flags, Marine Corps flags. His eyes lingered on the veteran patches visible on vests, the visible scars on faces, the bearing of men who'd served in their own ways. Finally, Crawford's gaze returned to Jake. If I let you through and anything goes wrong. It's on me, Jake said immediately. Not the club, not your decision. Me, I'll surrender myself to your custody right here and now if a single law is broken. Crawford studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he turned to his officers. Stand down. Let them through. The younger deputy exhaled audibly. Others hesitated, looking to their sheriff for confirmation. I said stand down, Crawford repeated, firmer now. He looked back at Jake. But you ride slow. You follow every traffic law. And when the funeral's over, you leave the same way you came in, respectfully and without incident. Jake extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Crawford shook it, a firm grip that acknowledged mutual respect, however tentatively earned. You have my word, Sheriff. As Jake turned to walk back to his bike, Crawford called out, Morrison. Jake paused, looking back. Tommy Sullivan was a good kid who came back broken. If you helped put him back together, even for a while, then maybe I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, Jake replied. But you might consider owing Tommy the benefit of the doubt about the men he chose as brothers. Jake walked back to his chapter through a silence so complete he could hear his boots on the asphalt. When he reached his bike, Marcus handed him his helmet with an expression that mixed relief, pride, and amazement. How did you... Ghost started. Later, Jake interrupted softly. He mounted his bike, put on his helmet, and started the engine. 72 others followed suit, the rumble of engines returning like a ceremonial drumbeat. Crawford moved to his patrol car and, instead of driving forward to block them, pulled to the side. The other vehicles followed, creating a path. And then, as Jake began to roll forward, Crawford did something that would be remembered in Pine Ridge for generations. He brought his hand to his forehead in a crisp salute. One by one, every officer on that bridge followed suit, hands raised in respect to a fallen Marine and the brothers who'd come to honor him. Jake returned the salute, as did Marcus, Ghost, Diesel, and every veteran in the formation. And as 73 motorcycles crossed that bridge in perfect formation, the line between law and brotherhood, between prejudice and respect, between fear and understanding, blurred into something rare and beautiful. In that moment, honor recognized honor. The procession rolled through Pine Ridge at exactly 25 miles per hour, 5 under the posted limit, a deliberate display of respect and restraint. The main street stretched 3 blocks, lined with Victorian storefronts that had stood for over a century. And on every sidewalk, in every doorway, at every window, the townspeople watched. Jake kept his eyes forward, but his peripheral vision caught everything, a mixture of expressions ranging from fear to curiosity to something softer, recognition that the monsters they'd imagined were simply men on motorcycles, riding with somber purpose. An elderly woman standing outside the general store clutched her purse to her chest, but as the procession passed, Jake saw her lift her hand in a small wave. Further down, a middle-aged man in a Vietnam veteran's cap stood on his porch and saluted. 3 children pressed against a storefront window, eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The town was re-evaluating in real time, their expectations colliding with reality. The First Presbyterian Church sat at the end of Main Street, a white-painted structure with a steeple that reached toward the brilliant blue Colorado sky. Its parking lot, which normally held maybe 30 cars on a busy Sunday, now overflowed with townspeople, Tommy's extended family, and now 73 motorcycles that parked in perfect rows along the adjacent field. As engines cut off, Jake dismounted and took in the scene. A banner hung over the church entrance. Welcome home, Marine. On the front steps stood Tommy's mother, Margaret Sullivan, a small woman in her early 70s, dressed in black, leaning heavily on Sarah's arm. Her face was a mask of grief and confusion as she watched the riders dismount. Jake approached slowly, removing his sunglasses, Marcus and Ghost flanking him. He stopped at a respectful distance and spoke gently. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Jake Morrison. Your son was a brother to me and to all these men. We came to pay our respects, if you'll allow us. Margaret stared at him with red-rimmed eyes, taking in his weathered face, the leather vest with its patches and pins, the visible tattoos on his forearms. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice thick with emotion, Tommy talked about you, called you Reaper, said you were the only man who understood. He was a good man, ma'am. The best of us. He was my baby boy. Her voice cracked. And I didn't know how to help him when he came back from that war. I tried, but everything I did was wrong. He pulled away, and I lost him long before that car took him." Sarah squeezed her mother's hand as tears streamed down both their faces. Jake felt the weight of those words, the guilt every parent of a traumatized veteran carried, the helplessness of watching someone you love slip away into darkness. "Mrs. Sullivan," Marcus stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Tommy didn't pull away because you failed him. He pulled away because the war taught him things that couldn't be untaught. He saw things, did things, that carved holes in his soul. That's not your fault. That's the cost of service that nobody talks about." "Then why could you help him when I couldn't?" Margaret's question was plaintive, desperate for understanding. Ghost spoke up, his weathered face compassionate. "Because we carried the same holes, ma'am. We spoke the same language of nightmares and guilt. Tommy didn't need fixing. He needed to know he wasn't alone in being broken. That's what we gave him." Jake reached into his vest and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. "Tommy kept this. He wrote in it almost every day for the last 3 years. Sarah said you'd want it." He held it out carefully. Margaret took it with trembling hands, opened it to a random page and read aloud through tears. "Reaper taught me today that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry the weight without letting it crush you. I'm learning. Slowly, but I'm learning. The brothers don't expect me to be who I was before. They accept me as I am now. That's the difference." She closed the journal, clutching it to her chest. "Thank you for giving me back my son, even if only for a little while. Thank you for—" She couldn't finish, overcome by sobs. Sarah embraced her mother as Jake stepped back, giving them space. He turned to address his chapter, who had formed a loose semicircle near their bikes. "Listen up. We're guests here, we're respectful, we're quiet, and we honor Tommy the way he deserves. Understand?" A chorus of acknowledgement rippled through the group. Inside the church. The sanctuary was built for 100 people, maybe. With the town's attendants and the 73 riders, it was standing room only. The riders took positions along the back and side walls, standing at attention in respectful silence, their leather vests creating a ring of solidarity around the wooden pews. Tommy's casket sat at the front, draped in an American flag. Her photograph beside it showed him in dress blues, young and hopeful, before Afghanistan had taken its toll. Another photo showed an older Tommy, grinning beside a motorcycle, his arm around Jake's shoulders, taken 6 months ago at a club barbecue. The contrast between the two images told a story of loss and found redemption. The service began with traditional hymns, the church organ filling the small space with solemn music. Pastor James Whitmore, who'd baptized Tommy as an infant, delivered the eulogy, speaking of a boy who'd loved fishing in the Pine River, who'd helped his neighbors without being asked, who'd answered his country's call with honor. "But when Thomas came home," Pastor Whitmore said, his voice heavy with regret, "we didn't know how to welcome back the man who'd replaced the boy. We saw his struggle, his pain, and we felt helpless. Some of us," he paused, eyes sweeping the congregation, "some of us even turned away because confronting his pain meant confronting our own failure to support our veterans." A uncomfortable shifting rippled through the townspeople. "But Thomas found a new family," the pastor continued, looking directly at the riders standing along the walls. Men who understood his battles because they'd fought their own. Men who didn't judge him for his wounds, but accepted him as a warrior still fighting. "I've learned something today. That brotherhood isn't defined by how you look or what you wear. It's defined by who stands beside you when darkness comes." Sarah approached the pulpit next, her hands shaking as she unfolded a piece of paper. "My brother used to say that the club saved his life. I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he meant they gave him a distraction, something to do. But reading his journal, talking to Jake and Marcus and the others, I realized he meant it literally. They saved his life by giving him a reason to live, by showing him that being broken doesn't mean being worthless." She looked directly at the riders. "So thank you. Thank you for loving my brother when he couldn't love himself. Thank you for being the family he needed. And thank you for showing this town today that honor and respect aren't about appearances, they're about actions." The service continued with military honors. A Marine color guard, arranged by Sarah through the VA, performed a flag-folding ceremony. As taps echoed through the church, Jake watched tears stream down faces both rough and weathered, and soft and young. Grief was universal, transcending leather and badges and small-town prejudices. The Burial Pine Ridge Cemetery sat on a hillside overlooking the valley, a peaceful plot where generations of the town's families rested beneath Colorado sky. As Tommy's casket was carried from the church, Jake, Marcus, Ghost, Diesel, and 2 of Tommy's cousins serving as pallbearers, the entire town followed. The procession moved on foot through streets now lined with respectful silence. Business owners stood in doorways with hands over hearts. The Vietnam veteran Jake had seen earlier stood rigidly at attention, tears on his weathered cheeks. Even Sheriff Crawford, who'd followed at a distance in his patrol car, had parked and joined the procession. At the gravesite, Margaret Sullivan was handed the folded flag. She held it as if it were made of glass, her entire body shaking with the weight of finality. The Marine Honor Guard fired their 3 volleys, sharp cracks that echoed off the mountains, causing more than one rider to flinch at the remembered sound of gunfire. As the casket was lowered, Jake stepped forward. He removed a patch from his vest, a special one, earned only by those who'd served in combat before joining the club. He knelt, placed it on the casket, and spoke quietly, though his words carried in the mountain stillness. "Tommy, brother, you carried more than any man should have to bear. You fought wars both foreign and internal, and you never stopped trying to be better, do better, live better." His voice roughened. "You taught us that strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about getting up one more time than you fall down. Rest easy now, brother. We'll carry your memory with honor. We'll live by the lessons you taught us. And we'll never forget that you showed us what true courage looks like." One by one, other riders approached, each leaving something behind. Marcus left a silver dollar. Ghost left a small stone with Semper Fi engraved on it. Diesel, the hothead who'd wanted to force their way through, knelt with tears streaming and simply whispered, "Thank you for teaching me patience, brother." The line of riders stretched across the cemetery, each paying tribute in their own way. The townspeople watched in silence, witnessing a depth of emotion and brotherhood that shattered every preconception they'd held. When the last rider had paid respects, Margaret approached Jake. She was tiny beside his large frame, but her voice was steady. "Mr. Morrison, would you and your men join us at the community center? We're having a reception. I'd like to hear more stories about Tommy. The good times, the healing times." Jake looked to his men, then back to Margaret. "We'd be honored, ma'am." The community center. What followed was something none of them had expected: genuine connection. In the community center, over coffee and homemade sandwiches prepared by church ladies, the wall between club and town crumbled completely. Riders shared stories about Tommy, his sense of humor, his mechanical genius, his terrible singing voice. Townspeople listened, laughed, cried, and slowly began asking questions not born of fear, but of curiosity. "Why motorcycles?" asked an elderly man, a retired teacher. "What is it about riding that matters so much?" Ghost answered thoughtfully. "Freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from judgment. On the road, you're just a man and a machine and the pavement. Nobody cares about your past, your mistakes, your scars. You're defined by how you ride, how you treat your brothers, how you handle the road. For men like us who society wrote off or judged unfairly, that matters." A young mother approached Marcus, hesitant but curious. "I saw you all standing in church. You could have sat, but you didn't. Why?" Marcus smiled gently. "Respect, ma'am. We were guests. We took the space we were given and didn't presume to claim more. That's what brotherhood teaches, humility alongside strength." Sheriff Crawford stood near the entrance, watching the interactions with the expression Jake couldn't quite read. Finally, he approached. "Morrison." Crawford extended his hand again, more warmly than at the bridge. "I owe you an apology, a real one. I judged you based on reports and statistics and fear. I didn't see the men, only the colors." Jake shook his hand firmly. "You did what you thought was right, protecting your town. Can't fault a man for that. But maybe next time you'll ask questions before forming the barricade." Crawford chuckled ruefully. "Maybe I will. You know, Robert Sullivan, Tommy's uncle. He used to tell me that the worst criminals are often the ones who look the most respectable, and the best people sometimes look like they just rolled out of a bar fight. I never really understood what he meant until today. He sounds like a wise man." "He was. He also—" Crawford hesitated, then continued. "He also rode a Harley, kept it quiet, thought it would undermine his authority as sheriff. But Tommy knew. Used to help him work on it in the garage. I think that's where Tommy's love of motorcycles started. Jake felt a lump in his throat. Tommy never mentioned that. Probably because Robert made him promise not to. Small-town politics, you know. But looking back, I think Robert understood something I'm only now learning. That respect isn't about titles or appearances. It's about character. They stood in companionable silence, watching as riders and townspeople mingled, the barrier of fear replaced by tentative but genuine connection. Sarah approached with an older photo album. "Jake, I want to show you something." She opened to a page showing young Tommy with his uncle Robert, both standing beside a vintage Harley. This was taken the summer before Tommy enlisted. Uncle Robert told him, "Ride like you've got nothing to prove and everything to honor." Tommy never forgot that. Jake studied the photo, seeing the lineage of wisdom and respect that had shaped Tommy. He lived by those words. Every ride, every day. "I know," Sarah said softly. "And now I understand why you all do too." As afternoon faded toward evening, the riders began preparing to depart. They'd fulfilled their mission, honored their brother, and proven themselves in ways that statistics and reports never could. But before they could leave, Margaret Sullivan stood on a chair in the community center and called for attention. The room fell silent. "I want to say something," she began, her voice wavering but determined. "This morning, I was afraid. I was told you were dangerous, that you were a threat. I believed it because it was easier than believing my son had found something good in a place I didn't understand." She paused, looking around at the assembled faces. Rough men with soft hearts, tough exteriors protecting vulnerable souls. "But today, you've shown me, shown all of us, that family comes in many forms. That brotherhood isn't about blood, it's about choice. You chose my son when he needed choosing. You stood by him when he couldn't stand by himself. And today you honored him with more grace and respect than anyone could have asked for." Tears streamed down her face. "So thank you. Thank you for giving me back my son's smile, even if only in memory. Thank you for showing this town that we were wrong to judge, and thank you for being the family Tommy deserved." The room erupted in applause. Not polite, obligatory clapping, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. Riders and townspeople stood together, the division that had seemed insurmountable just hours ago now bridged by shared grief and mutual respect. As the sun set over Pine Ridge, 73 motorcycles lined up for departure. But this time the town didn't watch from behind closed doors and frightened windows. They stood along the streets, waving, some with tears, others with smiles. Children ran alongside the slow-moving procession, shouting goodbyes. The Vietnam veterans saluted again, this time with pride rather than uncertainty, and Sheriff Crawford, standing beside his patrol car, nodded to Jake as he passed, a silent acknowledgement that today had changed something fundamental in both of them. Jake led his chapter back toward that bridge, back toward the roadblock that had almost prevented this entire day from happening. But the patrol cars were gone now, the bridge open and inviting. Only Crawford's vehicle remained, positioned not as a barrier, but as a guardian watching over their safe departure. As they crossed the bridge, Jake looked back one final time. Pine Ridge was settling into evening, lights beginning to twinkle in windows, smoke rising from chimneys. A small town in the mountains, now forever changed by the understanding that honor wears many faces and brotherhood knows no uniform. Ahead, the road stretched toward home. Miles of asphalt and mountain passes, the cold evening air and the rumble of engines carrying them forward. But the weight Jake had carried on his shoulders since Tommy's death felt lighter now. Not gone. Grief never truly disappears, but balanced by the knowledge that they'd done right by their brother, and in doing so, had proven something essential about the men they were. Marcus pulled alongside him, giving a thumbs up. Ghost followed, grinning beneath his helmet. Even Diesel, the hothead who'd wanted confrontation, rode with visible peace in his posture. They had come to honor a fallen brother. They had stayed to bridge a divide, and they were leaving as better men, having shown a frightened town that respect recognizes respect, and honor recognizes honor, regardless of what colors you wear or which side of the law you ride. The ride back toward Arizona was quiet, in a way that felt sacred. Normally, club runs were filled with radio chatter, jokes, observations, complaints about sore asses and cold weather, but as 73 motorcycles wound through mountain passes in the fading light, the only sounds were engines and wind. Jake kept a moderate pace, not rushing but not dawdling, The temperature dropped rapidly as night approached, and he could feel fatigue settling into his bones, not just from the ride, but from the emotional intensity of the past 2 days. Every leader experiences moments that define their tenure, and he knew that what had happened at that bridge would be talked about for decades in club history. At a rest stop outside Durango, the chapter pulled off for fuel and a break. As riders stretched cramped legs and refilled tanks, the silence continued, a comfortable, contemplative quiet of men processing shared experience. Marcus approached Jake at the gas pump, leaning against his bike. "That was something, brother." "What happened back there?" "Yeah." Jake replaced the gas cap, his hands moving through familiar motions. "It was." "You know what Tommy would have said?" Marcus's eyes were distant, seeing a memory. He would have said, "See, Reaper, people aren't the problem. Fear is the problem. Kill the fear, and you find the humanity underneath." Jake smiled despite the ache in his chest. He was always better with words than the rest of us. He was better at a lot of things, including reminding us why we do this. Marcus gestured at the assembled riders. "We're not a gang. We're not criminals. We're broken men who found a way to heal by helping each other stay broken together. Tommy taught us that it's okay to not be okay, as long as you're not alone." Ghost joined them, holding 3 cups of terrible gas station coffee. "Heard from Sarah," she texted. He handed them each a cup. "Says her mom wants us to know we're welcome back anytime." Crawford apparently stopped by the Sullivan house after we left, apologized for the blockade, said he'd misjudged us. "Crawford's a good man who made a bad assumption," Jake said. "He did what he thought was right, and when proven wrong, he adjusted. That takes character." Diesel approached, looking uncharacteristically subdued. "Reaper, I need to say something." Jake turned his attention to the younger man, noting the conflict in his eyes. "I was wrong," Diesel said bluntly. "Back at the clubhouse when we were planning this, I wanted to force our way through. I wanted to prove we were tough, that we don't back down. But you—" He paused, struggling with the words. "You taught me something today. Real strength isn't about forcing respect. It's about earning it through actions. Tommy knew that, you knew that. I'm sorry it took me this long to figure it out." Jake placed a hand on Diesel's shoulder. "You're young, brother. You've got anger, righteous anger about how the world's treated you. That anger has its place, but today you learned when to set it aside and let honor speak instead. That's growth. Tommy would be proud of you." Diesel nodded, visibly emotional. "I miss him, Reaper. Miss him like hell." "We all do." Marcus pulled Diesel into a brief, fierce hug. "But we honor him by being better, by remembering what he taught us." As they prepared to mount up for the next leg, Ghost called out to the assembled chapter, "Listen up. Before we roll, I want everyone to think about what happened today. We rode into a town that feared us. We faced a police blockade. We could have escalated, could have forced the issue, could have confirmed every negative assumption they had." He paused, looking around at faces illuminated by parking lot lights and the distant glow of stars emerging in the darkening sky. "Instead, we showed them who we really are. We showed them that leather and patches don't define character, actions do. We showed them that veterans come in many forms and brotherhood transcends uniforms. Most importantly, we showed Tommy's family that their son found love and acceptance in our club. That's what we're about. That's what we've always been about." A chorus of agreement rippled through the group, fists raised in solidarity, heads nodding, the shared understanding of men who'd just accomplished something significant. Midnight, Highway 40. They stopped for the night at a small motel outside Albuquerque. Most riders immediately headed to rooms, exhausted by the physical and emotional demands of the day. But Jake found himself sitting in the parking lot, engine off, helmet in his lap, staring up at a sky filled with more stars than seemed possible. Carlos Ghost Mendoza pulled a chair from his motel room and sat beside Jake's bike. For a long while neither man spoke, just 2 old friends sharing silence and starlight. Finally, Ghost broke the quiet. "You know what Robert Sullivan's advice to Tommy means now? Ride like you've got nothing to prove and everything to honor?" "I've been thinking about it all night," Jake admitted. "It means don't ride with ego. Don't ride to intimidate or impress. Ride with purpose, with respect, with the understanding that every action reflects on your brothers." Ghost pulled out a worn photograph, the same one Sarah had shown them, Tommy and Robert, beside that vintage Harley. Robert understood something most people don't, that the outlaw image, the leather, the bikes, it's all just surface. What matters is the code you live by. We've been living by that code for years, Jake said. But today was the first time we really had to prove it to people who weren't predisposed to believe us, and we did prove it. Because of your leadership. Ghost looked at him seriously. You could have let pride guide you at that bridge. Could have revved engines, shown force, made it a confrontation. Instead, you killed your engine and walked forward with nothing but words and honesty. That took more courage than any fight. Jake thought about that moment, standing on that bridge, every eye on him, the weight of decision pressing down like a physical force. I was scared, Ghost. Scared I'd make the wrong call and ruin everything. But you didn't. And you know why? Because you weren't thinking about yourself. You were thinking about Tommy, about his family, about every one of us standing behind you. That's what makes you a good leader. You serve the club, not your ego. Sarah's text message notification interrupted the moment. Ghost read it aloud. Jake, I just wanted you to know. Mom fell asleep holding Tommy's journal and smiling. She said she finally understands who her son became, and she's grateful. Sheriff Crawford stopped by again tonight. He told Mom he's organizing a veterans support group in Pine Ridge, inspired by what he learned about the club. Thank you for changing our town for the better. You didn't just honor Tommy, you honored every veteran who struggles to find their place. Safe travels, brother. The last word, brother, carried weight. Sarah wasn't blood, wasn't a patch holder, but in calling Jake brother, she acknowledged the connection forged through shared love for Tommy. We did good today, Ghost said quietly. Yeah, Jake agreed. We did. The next morning, final miles. The Arizona desert never looked more beautiful than it did in that sunrise. Reds and oranges and purples painting the landscape as if God himself was welcoming them home. The chapter rode in formation, tired but satisfied, carrying the memory of Tommy and the knowledge that they'd honored him in the best way possible. As the Desert Rose Clubhouse came into view, Jake felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief at being home, sadness that Tommy would never pull into this lot again, pride in what they'd accomplished, and hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd changed some hearts and minds along the way. The bikes pulled into their usual spots, engines cutting off one by one until only silence remained. No one moved for a moment, letting the weight of the past 3 days settle, acknowledging what they'd been through together. Then Marcus swung off his bike and said, "First round's on me. We've got stories to tell and a brother to toast." Inside the clubhouse, the atmosphere was different than it had been when they'd left. There was still grief. That would take time to fade. But there was also something new, a collective sense of purpose reaffirmed, of identity validated, of brotherhood strengthened through trial. Jake stood at the head of the table, looking around at faces he'd known for decades, and faces he'd only known for years. Every one of them had stood behind him at that bridge, trusting his judgment, following his lead, even when the outcome was uncertain. "Brothers," he began, voice rough from exhaustion and emotion, "what we did this weekend will be remembered, not because we fought or forced our way through, but because we proved that honor and respect transcend appearances. We proved that brotherhood is about character, not colors. And we proved that Tommy Sullivan chose wisely when he chose us as family." He raised his beer. "To Tommy, Marine, brother, friend, may he rest in peace, knowing he changed us all for the better. And may we honor his memory by living up to the standard he set." "To Tommy," the chorus echoed through the clubhouse, glasses raised in salute to the absent brother who'd brought them all together one final time. As the evening wore on and stories flowed, some sad, many funny, all authentic, Jake stepped outside for air. The desert night was cool, stars emerging in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to its pack. Marcus joined him, 2 fresh beers in hand. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the world in shades of fire. "You think we changed anything?" Marcus asked eventually. "Or will Pine Ridge forget about us the moment we left?" Jake considered the question. "I think we planted seeds. Whether they grow depends on whether people like Crawford water them, nurture them, give them room to take root. But we did our part. We showed them that humanity isn't defined by what you wear or how you look. Sometimes that's all you can do. Show people the truth and hope they're brave enough to see it." Tommy would have liked how it ended. "Yeah, he would have." Jake smiled, remembering his friend's laugh, his loyalty, his determination to heal despite everything working against him. "He taught us that strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about admitting you're broken and choosing to keep going anyway. We carried that lesson to his funeral, and in doing so we carried him. Marcus raised his beer. To carrying each other. To carrying each other, Jake echoed. They clinked bottles as night fully descended, two old warriors standing watch over their brotherhood, guardians of a code that valued honor above all else. Behind them, the clubhouse glowed with warmth and laughter, and the kind of family that isn't born but chosen, forged through shared experience, tested by adversity, and strengthened by loss. Tommy Sullivan was gone, but his legacy remained, in the patches on their vests, in the lessons they carried, in the respect they'd earned at a bridge in Colorado, and in every mile they'd ride from that day forward. The road stretched endlessly ahead, full of unknown challenges and uncertain destinations, but as long as they rode together, carrying each other through darkness toward light, honoring the fallen while protecting the living, they'd remain what they'd always been, brothers, and sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. 6 months later, Jake received an envelope in the mail, postmarked from Pine Ridge, Colorado. Inside was a letter written in careful cursive and a newspaper clipping. Dear Jake, I hope this finds you and your brothers well. I wanted to update you on some developments here in Pine Ridge. Sheriff Crawford followed through on his promise to start a veterans support group. It meets every Tuesday at the community center. 12 local veterans attend regularly, including 2 Vietnam vets who'd been isolated for decades. They talk about struggles, share resources, and support each other, much like you described your club doing for Tommy. Mum donated Tommy's motorcycle. You'd worked on it together, she said, to the group. They're restoring it as a communal project, teaching skills and building camaraderie. Crawford joked that maybe when it's done they'll need someone to teach them to ride properly. I gave him your number. Hope that's okay. The town has changed, Jake. People talk about that day the bikers came, not with fear, but with something like pride. That we learned to look past our assumptions and see the humanity underneath. You taught us that lesson, and Tommy's memory continues teaching it. Mom asked me to tell you that you're welcome here any time. She means it. The whole town means it. You gave us back our son's story, the real story, not the partial one we'd constructed from fragments and misunderstanding. Thank you for honoring Tommy. Thank you for being his family. And thank you for showing us that respect recognizes respect, regardless of what colors you wear or which side of the law you stand on. Ride safe, brother. Sarah Sullivan. The newspaper clipping showed Crawford and a group of veterans standing beside Tommy's partially restored motorcycle. The headline read, Pine Ridge Vets Find Brotherhood Through Restoration Project. Jake folded the letter carefully and placed it in the club's memorial book, a leather-bound volume containing memories of fallen brothers kept in a place of honor in the clubhouse. That evening at the weekly club meeting, he shared Sarah's letter with the chapter. When he finished, the room sat in contemplative silence until Ghost spoke up. Tommy's still changing lives, he said quietly. Still teaching lessons. Still proving that broken doesn't mean worthless. That's his legacy, Marcus added. Not just what he meant to us, but what his story means to others who hear it. Jake looked around at his brothers, men of every background, every story, united by choice and commitment to a code that valued honor above all else. They'd ridden into fear and emerged with respect. They'd faced prejudice and responded with dignity. And in honoring one fallen brother, they'd reminded an entire town and themselves what truly mattered. Next year, Jake announced, we ride back to Pine Ridge. Not for a funeral this time, for a celebration. We'll help them finish Tommy's bike, meet with Crawford's veterans group, and show them that the bridge we crossed isn't just geography. It's a connection that remains, maintained by mutual respect and shared understanding. The chapter erupted in approval, fists pounding tables, voices raised in agreement. They'd returned to Pine Ridge not as outlaws or threats, but as brothers visiting family, proving that the momentary understanding forged at a police blockade had grown into something lasting. Because that's what honor does. It builds bridges instead of walls, connects instead of divides, and reminds everyone involved that humanity's greatest strength is recognizing it in others. Jake Morrison walked outside into the desert night, Tommy's memory heavy in his heart but lighter on his soul. Above, the stars shone with impossible brightness, and somewhere on the wind he could almost hear the rumble of engines. Tommy riding eternal roads, finally at peace, knowing his brothers would carry forward the lessons he'd taught them. The road stretched endlessly ahead, full of promise and possibility. And as long as there were brothers willing to ride it together, honor would continue to recognize honor, and the line between law and loyalty would blur into something greater, understanding. This story honors all veterans who struggle to find their place after service, all communities that learn to look past assumptions, and all brothers, blood or chosen, who carry each other through darkness toward light. Ride safe, ride honorable, ride together.